Hello, hello, and welcome back to Shatter Our Souls with Novaria. Today, we're tackling Quadraxis and doing a little bit of a deep dive into the bosses of Metroid as a whole. So, the other day I was talking with a friend, and the entire point of our conversation was about which bosses in gaming were the best, which were the worst, and trying to find ways to describe and mention or show what we were getting at. And some, notably bosses like Quadraxis and Flagra, the Metroid Prime, Ridley, all had been brought up in some capacity during this conversation as contenders for the greatest boss in their games. And when trying to figure out the reason why, these specifically these specific characters or creatures, beings within this universe, crop up as being these nigh untouchable, fantastic bosses in gaming. A couple things stood out. Number one, most of the bosses that we claim to be good bosses have have more backstory to them than the, shall we say, lesser bosses. For example, the Hive Mecha, the Incinerator Drone, and the Plated Beetle from Prime 1's early game, prior to fighting Flagra, most people forget about them. And I'll be honest, a lot of the basic Guardians in Prime 2 fall under a similar realm, shall we say. These bosses are not necessarily bad. They can be as mechanically complex as the player or game needs them to be. But without reason behind the characters, without story, without more to the character, there is almost a hesitation, a lack of ability to sit down and say, yeah, this character is this because A, B, C, D. So, why do I bring this up? Quadraxis is somewhat unique among the bosses of Prime 2. While many of them, like Dark Samus, Chica, or even, what are they? Amorbus, are considered what I would call to be incredibly important for the plot of the game. They don't all have the same niche. Chica is mechanically complex and is a fun boss to fight, but it's not one that I, on my initial playthrough, actually remembered. When talking about Amorbus, I remember the giant sandworms jumping in and out of the ground and how their power was tied directly to the arena itself. That ball in the center of the arena being its strength, shall we say. This all ties in somewhat neatly to there needs to be more to it. A boss that isn't fun or doesn't have mechanics behind it to make it a viable and enjoyable experience is going to disappear into the background. But a boss that is just there for the sake of being there is also not going to stand out. Which brings me to Quadraxis. Quadraxis is one of those bosses that you know about very early on. The foreshadowing, the writing on the wall for this creature, this being, was brought up the very first time Umos brings up the Dark World variant of the Ing Hive, or of the Sanctuary Fortress. That these mechanical beasts that were created specifically for the means of building up the world, of being defense drones for the light side of Aether, meant that there was something that the player could latch onto. There are robots here, got it. But throughout your time, you see many of the smaller security drones that are, I suppose, weaker, but have a very similar build to Quadraxis. Actually, nearly identical. Quadraxis is the same beast, just absolutely monstrous. And then the third version, which is, of course, when you enter the light world version of the temple itself. I'm just holding up for a moment here because I want to go into the battle against Quadraxis with full health, as Quadraxis doesn't drop much for ammo or health pickups. But the light world variant of this room has the pieces of Quadraxis's legs acting as scaffolding, laying along the floor, the walls, dangling in various areas. You can see part of its construction, but the completed version ended up in the Dark World. This beast is easily one of the most imposing in all of the Metroid Prime trilogy. And with good reason. Starting off, Quadraxis is a boss that has multiple forms. It's not something that is new to this game. In fact, almost every major boss in Prime 2 has a multi-phase boss fight. Quadraxis just takes the norm and makes it absurd. And I kind of like that about Quadraxis. But, as I mentioned earlier, when I had actually sat down and tried to plan out what this series would look like, from day one, I knew Quadraxis was going to be a highlight of the series. Partially because Prime 1 and 2 were designed very similarly on the GameCube. And that gives them an edge in certain regards and makes them difficult to play in others. But Quadraxis as a whole, while being intended as a final challenge of sorts, Hypermode in Prime 2 didn't exist. Not in the original version of the game, anyways. So this boss was never designed with this difficulty in mind. The result of it not having that difficulty in mind is that with the constant HP drain, the minimal increase in ammunition, in HP over the course of the battle, means that this battle was meant to be a race against time. That if this battle could be completed, I had all the faith in the world that I would be able to complete the Metroid Prime trilogy on Hypermode. And I stand by that statement even to this day. Now, 6 months late after the initial planning phase for this series. Quadraxis has always been one of those bosses that showcase the upper limits of what the game engine was capable of, being a kaiju-sized monster that was meant to act as a primary defender of this region. It's stronger than average. It hits like a truck. It has weapons that make the rest of the trilogy bow before it. I would be completely comfortable to say that Quadraxis would, provided it could do damage, be able to defeat the Metroid Prime. I'm sorry, what? If you did not see that, I shot a super missile and it ricocheted off Quadraxis's face and hit the kneecap, blowing up the knee in and of itself. That was pure luck. I would never be able to replicate it. Ow. I suppose I should get into what makes Quadraxis so difficult and so unique. Quadraxis is a multi-phase boss. And there are, in fact, 3 phases to the battle. 4 if you count how the first phase changes over time. So, to start this off, Quadraxis is, of course, the quadruped with the headpiece, if that's the easiest way to describe it, sitting in the center. The headpiece, of course, will pelt you with laser beams, with the Annihilator beam. It will pelt Samus with missiles. All of this is important for the creature in and of itself because this acts as its primary weapon set. Throughout the battle, Samus's primary goal is to destroy the 4 kneecaps, because the 4 kneecaps, the armor on it is what keeps the beast standing. No armor, and it falls down, leading to Phase 2. Phase 2 of the battle has Samus facing the head of Quadraxis, an enemy that Samus physically cannot fight on even terms. And by that I mean that the head itself is guarded by an energy shield. I can't fire through the shield, and thus have to disrupt it by disrupting the communication between the base and the head. Once the communication is disrupted, Quadraxis will try to regain communication with the primary body. Thus, it sends out 3 antennae to regain its bearings. Regardless of whether or not you destroy one of the antennae, it will drop a mini Quadraxis. I actually don't know what the little sentinel dudes' names are, but I'm going to call them mini Quadraxis for the sake of what it is that they look like. The minis are the second phases. I suppose the easiest way to describe it would be the second phase of the battle has them as your ammo points. They handle your healing and any ammunition you might need for the duration of the rest of the battle. So there we go. We have Part 1, Part 2. The main head of Quadraxis, as I mentioned, is completely invulnerable while the force field is up. So a lot of the second section is going to be about defeating the 3 antennae on the head of Quadraxis. Once that is destroyed, Quadraxis can no longer put on its shield. With no shield, Part 3 begins. And the goal of Part 3 is to disrupt Quadraxis enough for it to go into a stun mode. It no longer has this core, the center, for its bearings. And instead, you are going to be using, I suppose, slightly more mundane means of defeating it. By launching yourself off of the legs, disrupt it to get it dizzy, launch yourself off of the legs at it, and then hit one of the 2 bomb ports in the top of the head to deal the final 2 strikes to the, I suppose, the brain, the central control system of Quadraxis. theoretically, as far as a boss complexity goes, this is one of the more in-depth or unique bosses in the entire trilogy, with notable outliers being creatures like the Metroid Prime, like the Omega Pirate. But I think there's only one boss in the franchise that is more complex than Quadraxis, and that would be the battle with Emperor Ing itself. And the reason behind that is because Emperor Ing, very similarly to Quadraxis, goes across multiple forms throughout your battle, making it more of a unique challenge to defeat in general. Speaking of the Emperor, we're going to be dealing with him in the near future. And to be honest, I like the sound of that. I think that it's a good thing. Anywho, the legs have been officially destroyed. There is no additional communication, meaning that at this point in time, there's only one phase left. I need to stop Quadraxis from launching the Annihilator beam at me, which seems to have a very long stun. And then begin the long process of making sure that I can actually defeat Quadraxis' main core. Yeah, this attempt is going to be a little bit of a dud, because I have a feeling that, yeah, it just gained its bearings again. That's okay. So, overall, what is there to expect for the future of this franchise? One thing that I like to come back to is what's next. And the reality is that Prime 1, 2, and 3 have some very big shoes to fill for Prime 4 Beyond. If I'm being honest, I believe that it's part of the reason why the development cycle has been as chaotic as it has been, is because the developers at Retro are trying to recapture the majesty of the original trilogy. And if I'm being honest, I don't really think that's an easy task for any development studio to do. Retro, ironically, despite everything that is going right or wrong for them, is probably one of the very few teams out there that could potentially do it. Because they've done it 3 separate times. And with that, Quadraxis is defeated. With the destruction of Quadraxis, we now have access to the Annihilator Beam. Now, the Annihilator Beam is possibly the most powerful beam in the trilogy. The easiest way to describe it is as an antimatter cannon. Effectively, based on what I understand of our world and science in general, is that antimatter can erase matter. That's the short version. Therefore, if I am understanding accurately, an antimatter cannon would just simply be able to erase the matter that is fired at, making it, bar none, the single most destructive weapon in Samus's entire arsenal across the franchise. Note that this isn't necessarily the case. There are things that eclipse the Annihilator beam in terms of destructive force, such as the whatchamacallit, the hyper beam or the phazon beam. But these are outliers and difficult to reproduce for Samus as a whole. With this, the third energy controller of Dark Aether is now drained of energy, meaning that of the 8 segments, 6 are on Aether, 1 is in Dark Aether, and 1 is with Samus. This is truly the turning point of the war. There is only one energy transfer module. Samus, being the sole holder of this energy transfer module, means that this is the single weakest that the Ing has ever been, as far as the energy and the world that the Ing live in. They've never seen defeat in this way. The energy transfer module was built by the Ing as a whole, or built by the Lumina, but the power of it was never actually used against the Ing. They lost it before they ever had a chance to give it its full chance, its full potential as a weapon, as a tool. The Ing used it very unceremoniously to create the version of Dark Aether that we see. But the final version, the one that truly sets everything apart, is, I suppose, somewhat uniquely placed here. There are 8 fragments of this energy. And I was wrong when I said it was that Samus had 1. She actually has 2 fragments of the energy. The first fragment being the Dark Aether's version of the energy from the Ing Hive, and the other being Samus's Light World counterpart from Aether that was stolen. Either way we look at it, both halves need to be involved and used in order for one to eclipse the other. But it is something of note. I don't know why I'm trying to fight these things. They're not actually going to do much. So, overall, well, that didn't work. Overall, I have to say that this is the weakest that they've ever been. The Ing are now on defense. And I'm not talking about like the basic defense duty that they've been on for however long. This is something far more dangerous for them. With only 1 fragment left, the Emperor himself, or itself, is acting as the guardian of what I can best describe as the Leviathan Seed. Because it is acting as the guardian, it stands as both the last hope of the Ing, but of all of Dark Aether in general. Anywho, we know how this goes. We took the energy from Dark Aether, have brought it to Light Aether, and once again begin to upload the energy to send back to Umos. This works for me most of the time. There are some things that I think could make this situation more extravagant or unique, but overall it's pretty decent. But I think today of all days, I'm going to extend the video a little bit. Normally, I try to stick to about 30 minutes at a time. Sometimes a couple more, sometimes a couple less, but on average, 30 minutes. Today, we are making the extra journey back to the Great Temple for Samus's final upgrade. Now, for those in the know, you know exactly what this item is. Easily one of Samus's most powerful tools, capable of mitigating all of the effects of Dark Aether, the hazardous, slow burn loss of health in Dark Aether, now completely nullified. But it goes so much farther beyond that. The Ing Storm no longer has an effect, neither do poisonous bogs. Samus effectively has free reign of both the light and dark world from that moment onward. All thanks to a little upgrade, the light suit. Now, the light suit is one of those tools that I've always enjoyed. Purely aesthetically, it is one of the most unique and best looking suits that Samus has and will ever wear. And I don't really feel any shame in saying that. While some of the older Metroids had suits like the gravity suit or the fully upgraded version of the Varia suit, Prime 2 gets the light suit. The perfect combination of both the light of Aether as well as the Chozo technology. It is an absolute beast of design, of ingenuity, and is easily one of the best looking suits in the franchise. Now, I keep saying that it's one of the best looking suits, but there are a couple that I think do outdo it as far as design goes. The most notable, in my opinion, actually goes to Metroid Dread's, what I'll call the Metroid suit. I think most people will understand what we're getting at when I say that. But it's the final version of the suit after fighting Ravenbeak. That particular version, I find to be one of the best looking in the franchise, as okay, let's go over here. It shows off the somewhat more animalistic nature of Samus at that point, but it also shows off a different look to the suit. That version of it is no longer this metallic suit of armor. It's organic. The plates of steel now look like bone jutting out from Samus's shoulders. And it's one that has, I think, potential repercussions going forward for Samus, as I believe that Metroid Dread has a lot of possibility for what the future of the franchise, 2D, 3D, or otherwise, will be like. And I believe that Dread is going to find that Samus no longer works with or alongside the Federation. It's one of those things that I find difficult to suspend disbelief on after the results of Metroid Fusion, where Samus is still working alongside the Federation after them attempting to end Samus's life as a result of, oh, we can just use the X version of Samus. That's fine. And this one multiplies. No. They made a fatal error, and if I am being honest, one that I would not. I'm surprised Samus turned around to help them again. But this being said, it was also a bit more of a dire circumstance situation where Samus needed to be involved because she was the only one immune to the X parasite. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. I see the future of the franchise being that Samus is going to try to find a way to either harness the power of the Metroid DNA, or she's going to try to rid herself of that power. And depending on which side of the argument you fall on, I can see either one working out well. If Samus chooses to find a way to use the power of the Metroid suit for good, then theoretically, Samus will be more than capable of handling whatever comes her way. She'll be a beacon of hope, but an unstoppable force. And that is something to be noted, is that at this point in time, there is nothing in the entire franchise that can hold Samus back. Even the Chozo, a mighty warrior like Ravenbeak, could not defeat Samus. So it stands to reason that she'd become the unstoppable force. The other option is trying to find a way to rid herself of the power. Perhaps viewing it as more of a curse or a weakness, something that could potentially come back to hurt her later. And given that it has already come back to hurt her by preventing her from using the ship, I don't really see it being something that she will actively want to keep. But what do I know? I'm grasping at straws and trying to make sense of a situation that I don't fully understand as of yet. But tell me what you think down below. What are your thoughts on the future of Prime 4 Beyond? Or the future of the continuation of the 2D franchise? I'd love to hear it. Every perspective has bearing and merit on what this franchise could potentially become. I love this suit. May the light of aether serve you well. There is a part of me that wishes that it would have stayed to the white and gold from the introduction to the suit. I believe that the white and gold has was a beautiful color scheme, but for what it lost in the gold, it gains from being one of the most sleek, unique designs in the franchise. The Chozo technology, for all it is often quite bulky compared to Luminoth, something that could be fixed in the future. As always, if you like what you see, drop a like, leave, subscribe, and we will catch you next time. Until then, have a good one.